Today I'm joined by a very special guest. It's Victor Gao, the Chair Professor of Suzhou University. Many of you will know of Victor, who appears on many international television programs discussing China and the world. Welcome to the show, Victor.
Thank you very much.
Look, not so long ago, we've had two very significant events, I think, globally. One is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in Tianjin, and the second one was the military parade celebrating the 80th anniversary of the defeat of Japanese aggression and global fascism. There's been a lot of talk about Tianjin and its global implications, and perhaps I could start by asking you to give us your thoughts on the event. And there's an angle that I really would like to reflect upon, and that is that in the 1850s, we had the Tianjin Treaties, which was a series of unequal treaties. And I thought it was fitting that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization came up with the Tianjin Declaration, which in many ways spoke to a new chapter, not just for China, but also for the global south.
Well, Tianjin is a major port city, especially for the northern part of China, north of the Yangtze River. And traditionally, ever since Beijing was chosen to be the national capital, Tianjin has always been a very important city in defense of Beijing. And especially after the Opium War in 1840, 41, etc. And then in subsequent decades, when China faced with a successive wave of foreign aggressions, then Tianjin became a port city, very much fought after. Foreign powers landed in Tianjin and then started their march onto Beijing. So that's the tragic side of Tianjin. Now, Tianjin was also turned into a concession by many foreign powers, and after 1949, Tianjin has become what we call city directly under the administration of the State Council, making it at that time one of the three cities with such status: Beijing, Tianjin, and Shanghai. Later, Chongqing city was also turned into such a status city. And Tianjin being the port city means that lots of goods from Beijing shipped outside of China, or from the rest of the world shipped into Beijing and northern parts of China would use Tianjin as the hub. So it's very important. And I think the reason why Tianjin was chosen to be the venue for the SCO summit is multifaceted, mainly because Beijing is the national capital and the SCOU is named after Shanghai. And of course, I think Tianjin should be given a chance because it is, from the very beginning, one of the three such cities with national status, and now one of the four. And Tianjin has been achieving major progress in recent years, expanding its port services, serving multiple parts of China, as well as Outer Mongolia and Central Asia countries like Kazakhstan, for example. And the port facilities could deliver services to almost everywhere in the world. So I think it's a well-chosen venue. And I was in Tianjin making a program just a few days before the SCO summit. And they brought us to the Tianjin port, where we did this production. And I saw with my own eyes the high level of automation in the Tianjin port. Basically, the containers moved back and forth without any human being involved. It's all automated, highly AI enabled, and it is one of the most advanced port cities in China and one of the best port cities in the world. You may know for sure that 7 of the largest 10 container ports are here in China, including the Tianjin port.
The Tianjin port is it's a demonstration port of 5G, of automation, AI, and those sorts of things. And I think it really showcases particularly Huawei's capability initially in that arena. But aside from its economic significance historically, the SCO summit, I think, perhaps drew a couple of interesting things, and I'd appreciate your thoughts on it. One is that it was the first time that Prime Minister Modi from India has visited China for 7 years. And that's particularly in the context of recent tensions and difficulties in the relationship seemed to be quite a significant moment. Mm-hmm. The second one was more broad than that, and that went to the expansion, if you will, or the deepening of collaboration across the entire Eurasian continent. So perhaps you could just give us some insights and perspectives on Prime Minister Modi's visit and what the significance of that is, and what the significance is in the broader strategic sense, geopolitically and economically, for Eurasia as a whole.
Well, many people in the West thought that it was thanks to President Trump's maximum bullying of India in the course of this trade war, tariff war, that pushed Prime Minister Modi to China for the SCO summit, for example. I actually don't agree. Why? Because I think with or without the US factor, there are all the reasons for China and India to normalize their relations and to get along with each other for constructive purposes. Of course, China and India need to put their territorial disputes behind them, which is a big challenge, of course, for both countries. But I've emphasized on many occasions that the McMahon line, which India insists should be the border between China and India in the eastern section of their border, has never been recognized by China. No Chinese government has ever, entered into real negotiation about that or signed the agreement, etc. So from the Chinese perspective, it's completely illegal. It's illogical. And therefore, China and India really need to engage with each other for a very serious talk about how to make sure that neither China nor India will continue to suffer from the bad legacy of the British rule of India, where they declared everyone in India, regardless of their social status or caste, for example, would be considered as second-class citizens. So we are in a completely new world, and India should no longer believe that whatever the British left behind should be taken as the truth and should be the border between China and India. But other than that, I think China and India can do so many things. I coined the term called the superpopulations, meaning a country with a population above 1 billion would qualify to be a superpopulation. In the world of today, there are only two superpopulations, China and India. So both China and India have tremendous amount of responsibilities for our own people, for each other, and for mankind, because combined together, we account for such a big chunk of the total world population, and it gives us all the reasons to be friendly and constructive, good neighborly with each other, rather than, for example, agitating for war or conflict or confrontation, especially if any one of us will be used as a proxy by another big power. That probably will be the worst case scenario for both China and India. So personally, I was so delighted to see Prime Minister Modi attending the SCO summit meeting in Tianjin, and he became an instant star. Everyone wants to talk to him. All media wants to interview him, and his pictures flashed around on global networks as well as on internet channels, etc. That really heralded well for China-Indian relations. And it is also encouraging to see that India mentioned that after more than 10 years, they wanted to talk with China about how to solve the border dispute. And they wanted to have a permanent solution of the border dispute. That's encouraging signs. Whether it's sufficient to put the territorial disputes behind us, solving the dispute, I do not know. Probably it will take much longer than that. But that gives all the reasons for China and India to reach out to each other. Foreign Minister Wang Yi visited India, and he said all the right things about China-India relations. I've been to India for many times, both New Delhi, Mumbai, and several other cities, for example. I really respect the Indian people, and I think any country to belittle or to kind of dismiss India, calling it a dead economy, is the wrong thing in the world of the 21st century to do. And I think Indian people really do not like it. They want to be treated as an equal. They wanted to really put all their efforts into uplifting hundreds of millions of people from poverty, as China did before 2020, We uplifted more than 800 million people out of poverty. It is time for India to do the same.
Many people were surprised actually by the Trump administration's decision to impose not just a 25% tariff on Indian products, but 50% tariffs on Indian products. How significant do you think those sorts of decisions are to the sort of medium-term trajectory of China-India relations, of course, but also India's own sense of itself in the world?
Well, trained as a lawyer from Yale Law School, I have full respect for President Donald Trump because his presidency, his office really commands a lot of respect in the world of today. However, I personally do not agree with many things of his policies or his foreign affairs policies, for example. And I think from President Trump's perspective, he probably had several reasons to dismiss India. First of all, he thought that now we have China as a very significant country. The United States called China as a pacing threat. And maybe, if India is left with itself developing continuously for another 10 or 20 years, India will be a very significant country. India says within, let's say, another 25 years, it wants to be in the top 3 economies in the world. So that's actually encouraging. And sometimes when you are faced with a megatrend in the world, it's futile to fight against the megatrend anyway, is that right? But probably Trump and his advisors around him would say, wow, we have one China now to deal with, and in a matter of another decade or so, 2 decades, you have India as a top economy in the world too. They need to deal with both China and India. So they probably thought maybe that should not be the case. And President Trump and his government probably did exactly the same thing that the United States did to China for the last 20 years or so, or 25 years, since 2000. Why? Because they want to set up all the roadblocks to prevent China to continue to develop. They want to throw China on the ground, throw a big rock into China's development course, for example. And now they probably want to do the same thing. They do not want to see India with 1.4 billion people to rise in peace and become a very significant and impactful economy in the world. I sometimes found it very amusing that the Indians celebrated the change. They say we are now finally larger than Great Britain as an economy, and they are outpacing Germany very soon, for example. In China, we never celebrated those moments. No one cared because we thought China just need to keep developing regardless of our comparative advantages or disadvantages with others. Our mission is to develop. With or without the United States or any other country, China needs to develop. But India cares a lot in comparing India with other countries, China, US, Britain, or others. So I think President Trump probably did the disservice for US foreign policy by dismissing India, dismissing Prime Minister Modi, and ordering India not to buy oil from Russia at a time when I'm fully aware many American companies are doing the oil trade with Russian interests. Europeans keep buying natural gas from Russia, etc. So it's completely double standard and hypocrisy in a sense.
It seems that President Trump, in a sense, has doubled down on some of this with a social media tweet. President Putin and Prime Minister Modi together, where he said that it looks like we've lost Russia and lost India to the dark and something China. It seems to me to be a very unusual way of conducting foreign policy, because it doesn't seem to be conducive to having friends and influencing people. How do you explain this? It seems very counterproductive.
Well, based on my previous working experience, educational experience back in the United States at Yale University, including Yale Law School, and subsequent working experiences, I have met with all the US presidents since President Nixon down. with two exceptions. I've never met with Gerald Ford, but Gerald Ford graduated from Yale Law School, so we communicated once. And then I've never met with President Trump. But based on my personal experience with all these presidents or former presidents, etc., my conclusion is very shocking. I think President Trump is truly very extraordinary and very unusual. He's not like any of his other presidential predecessors. In many ways, almost every aspect, he's different. Now, whether he's different for the betterment of the United States or not, that's a conclusion for historians to reach, is that right? But I think the way that he's launching one revolution after another, taking on Harvard University, fortunately he has not taken on Yale yet, and then declaring war on so many entities, treating Governor Newsom of California as if he's nobody, and sending in National Guards into California, you name it, so many things. It seems that he's launching a revolution in the United States as well as abroad. Now, if you talk about revolution, we in China know revolution. We had a 10-year revolution, 1966 to 1976, which eventually was called a national calamity. It was a huge disaster for China. So my advice for President Trump is that when you launch a revolution, beware of the consequences. You really need to calculate and be very, very fine-tuned as to what exactly you want to achieve in launching the revolution. Otherwise, it may not be worth it. You know, the French launched the French Revolution. They guillotined the king and the queen. They slaughtered so many noblemen, for example. Eventually, it caused huge upheaval in the society. And then, lo and behold, Napoleon emerged. And then he launched the wars after wars, etc. Of course, historians now say Napoleonic War were well intended anyway, but let's leave that aside. So I think President Trump is really wreaking havoc in U.S. foreign policy, U.S. domestic policy, in U.S. relations between the federal government and the state government, in the federal government's relations with vis-a-vis the universities, the federal government's relations vis-a-vis the courts, for example, and so many things. I'm afraid the United States in 2029 will be completely different from the United States President Trump inherited on January the 20th, 2025. Whether it will be for the better, whether it will be for MAGA or for MAGA, whatever you call it, I'm not known. I'm very concerned. And I think this level of capriciousness and unpredictability demonstrated by President Trump and his government is a reason for concern for the United States.
Well, I guess, as you say, time will tell. But in terms of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, some important consensuses were arrived at with the declaration, and also the proposal to create an SCO development bank, which points to a maturation of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization from an organization originally focused on counterterrorism and those sorts of security issues to one that has a much broader vision now, it seems. How do you think this is going to unfold in terms of the economic integration of Eurasia? And what does that mean, I guess, from a geopolitical point of view?
Well, first of all, SCO was set up with a main focus on anti-terrorism because that was 2001. The United States launched the war in Afghanistan, which lasted for about 20 years and created lots of problems. And when the United States ran away from Afghanistan, lots of the problems were not resolved, and they actually became even worse. So I think SCO was mandated to coordinate different countries around Afghanistan to fight against terrorism and extremism and radicalization. I think this remains a major focus for SCO even up to today. However, over the years, lots of other things were picked up, mainly because I think, especially China, we believe that you not only need to identify where terrorism is, you also need to identify what's the environment giving rise to terrorism. And that's actually poverty, lack of development, etc. So China talk to all the other SCO members to say maybe we should also focus on development, connectivity, and education, for example, equal opportunities for all. So I think SCO over the years picked up other mandates, including especially connectivity, economic development, elimination of poverty, and making sure that people in every society should be fully respected, whether they are men or women, adults or children. So I think this means that SCO itself is evolving, and now when we are facing with lots of headwind against free trade, SCO wants to be very much defending free trade. And if you look at the composition of the members of the SCO, you have major energy exporting country, and you have major oil gas importing country. So I think SCO would also focus on energy cooperation, making sure that energy security is really assured for all members of the SCO organization. But you also mentioned other things which SCO need to focus upon, mainly because SCO has a unique structure and a unique way of doing things. It's on consensus basis, meaning any big initiative cannot be done without every member fully in agreement. So every country has a veto power. Sometimes it slows down the efficiency, and lots of people complain about that. But I think overall it is good for SCO as a whole. For example, in recent years, especially after the outbreak of the Ukraine war, Russia, among others, were talking about maybe we should introduce a SCO payment system or settlement system. Brazil is very eager to talk about maybe we should come up with a SCO currency, for example. And China, being the largest economy among the SCO members, always want to listen to all the views. But then collectively, I think SCO may conclude, well, we should still wait rather than rush through the SCO currency, SCO payment system, etc. And for people like me, personally, I have no problem with the US dollar. I have no problem with the SWIFT system. The problem I have is with any country try to weaponize the US dollar or weaponize the SWIFT system. Because if the United States is believed to have a tendency of weaponizing the dollar or weaponizing the SWIFT system, then you create not only fear but also distrust, and then incentive to do something alternative to the current system. So I think it is not surprising that within the SCO membership and without, there are countries which keep talking about maybe we should come up with an alternative to dollar, alternative to SWIFT system. And I also know major decision makers in the United States bang on the table and say, no, we should not tolerate SCO dollar or SCO currency, SCO alternative to the SWIFT system. But then the US decision maker should start by saying, okay, I know the point, and I would never weaponize the dollar, I would never weaponize the SWIFT system. That will take all the wind out of the sail of any attempt to introduce alternative currency and alternative payment settlement system. But I think the establishment of the SCO Development Bank is a step in the right direction, because it will create a platform whereby any of these initiatives can be talked about, can be thrashed out in greater details. And then when you reach, as you mentioned, a higher level of maturity, I think these initiatives can be put into implementation. I'm pretty sure that eventually no country in the world should be allowed to weaponize its currency, because that's not the right thing. Currency being a kind of common commodity for the general use of the public should be just like air or kind of breeze, wind, etc. You cannot just say, okay, let me take out all the oxygen in the air and then people suffocate, for example. That's not the right thing. So the problem is not with the dollar or the SWIFT system. The problem is with major weaponization of the dollar and the SWIFT system.
So Victor, a few days after the Tianjin summit, Of course, Beijing then played host to a major global event, which was also attended by many leaders from various countries around the world. The military parade, of course, has drawn a lot of attention from observers globally, whether it's the former American ambassador to Beijing who talked about China stealing technology, or whether it's comments about who attended and who stood where, and those sorts of things. And I guess from a Chinese perspective, in what ways was the military parade significant, and why do you think it has drawn such global attention and interest?
Well, on September the 3rd, during the parade, I was in CCTV studio doing live commentary about the parade as it unfolds in front of the whole world. And I was really very much touched. The first parade I participated in was back in 1984, when Deng Xiaoping presided over the parade and reviewed the troops. So I think all these decades kind of collapse into one singularity on September the 3rd. Now let me share with you my observations. I think history will look back at the September the 3rd Victory Parade as a turning point in human history, because while it was selectively known about China's military power, China was very prudent and very careful not talk too much about it. But for this military parade, China really showcased its best military equipment and the technologies. To such an extent, I think the message is very clear. From this moment, no foreign country, any foreign country, or any groups of countries should ever dare to impose a military war on China. Why? Because China has demonstrated fully in terms of conventional weapons, nuclear weapons, missiles of all kinds, drones, and robots, for example, of all kinds. China has the best technology and the best equipment and the most lethal equipment and weapons in the world. But the underlying message is even more important. China demonstrated its military power not to scare anyone. It is demonstration of its commitment to peace. Why? Because China's message is, now I have all the human power, military power, technologies of all kinds to make sure that you don't want to mess around with me and launch a war against me, because you will be crushed. I told distinguished Americans, if you want to war against China, you will get war. If you want to destroy China, you will be destroyed. If you want to impose a nuclear war on China, you will be wiped out by a nuclear war. Now, I said that back in April. I was, at that time, was already generally aware of what kind of military power would be demonstrated on September the 3rd military parade. And I said this with full conviction that China will one day, which turned out to be September the 3rd, demonstrate to the full satisfaction of everyone who cares to watch it that China has the military power. I would say in terms of conventional weapons, China is minimum on the par with the United States. As a matter of fact, on many areas, China is already way ahead of the United States. For example, in terms of military robots, China actually a few years ago suggested to the United States that we collectively, human beings, should not weaponize robots. The Americans turned that down. The Americans say, no, we want to develop military robots. And China said, are you really serious? That means if you want to militarize robots, then we would do the same. So, boom, leap and bound forward. China is way ahead of the United States in military robots. Drones, China is way ahead of the United States, not only of large-scale military drones, but also medium, smaller sized. And then the drone technology, the integration of drones with other systems, and the AI-enabled weapons of all kinds. So I think this message is the clearest to me. I think it's a turning point in history. Now the second point is that while I looked at all pieces of weapons being showcased, and the soldiers and the militia marching in very impressive formations, etc., in the future war, I think it's not that each and all of these military pieces would matter. What will matter most is whether you have a way to fully integrate all these different dimensions. I call it space, air, ground, that is the army, surface water, that is the navy, and the submarine. So 5 dimensions all integrated into one single dimension, and then enabled by data information and AI. So it becomes a seamless web of a killing machine. So in the future, if there is any war involving China, don't expect that a tank will just come to you. You will be really enveloped with a complete web of integrating space, sky, ground, surface water, as well as underwater, the submarines. And then the fact that they also demonstrated and showcased a kind of submarine launched very powerful missile, and in automated manner, meaning no man will be involved. It will be completely automated. Under the water, sailing thousands of miles, for example. That means the Chinese military is not just on the ground inside China. Their submarines, their military robots can roam anywhere in any part of the world, not to showcase China's power, but to make sure that any country, any military power, any group, for example, should have second thoughts in terms of thinking about a war against China. That message is clear, and then I'm pretty sure in the coming years, China will build upon all the technologies and the advantages it has accumulated, and will be the major force defending peace as far as China is concerned, and also defending peace for mankind.
Well, you've heard it here for the first time, folks, that this is a turning point. We've had 2 major events in China, and as Victor Gao has shown and argued, these lay the groundwork for ongoing economic development of the world as well as peace. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much. Thank you.